Moment, so hopefully, oh, so you probably might have heard that recording in progress. We're just building numbers. We've got again quite a few people logged on tonight, so we'll just give it a few minutes and get those numbers built up. I think we have over 100, but we're up to 55, 56 now, which is good. So I'll just let it run on for another few seconds, and then we'll make a start. Okay, the numbers seem to have settled, so we will make a start. So, yeah, well, welcome again. This is going to be the last of our webinars for the spring, which is quite good because we've had a good session so far. So all of you, I think, probably know who I am. I'm Bill Stockdale, and I'm chair of Thornley Street History Group. Tonight, we're really fortunate to have Dr. Lauren McIntyre. And Lauren's going to give us a wonderful talk, and she's going to be talking about the highway to Hull, the excavation of Hull Trinity burial ground. So I'm certain that you will enjoy that. If you've got any questions, please put them into the Q&A box. Don't use chat. And as always, we're time limited. We'll try and keep as many questions open as possible, but just keep sending them in and we'll try and get as many answered. Okay, I'll now hand over to Lauren.
Hi, hello everybody. Thank you for having me. If you've not seen me speak before, as Bill said, my name's Dr. Laura McIntyre, and I work for Heritage Burial Services at Oxford Archaeology in Oxford. And the talk I'm going to be doing tonight is actually about an excavation that was conducted by our Lancaster office. We have three offices, one based in Oxford, one in Lancaster, one in Cambridge. So this is a Lancaster job. So 5 years ago, we were excavating Hull Trinity burial ground. Just before I start, I'll turn my camera off so that you can focus more on the slides instead of my face. Yeah, so let me just give me a second. Is that off? Oh, no, I think I've just muted myself. There we go. Okay, so I don't appear to be able to turn my camera off, so I'm just going to reduce this box and I will get started. So, I will just warn everybody before we get going that this presentation does contain images of human skeletal remains. I will be discussing osteology and paleopathology as well, so that's just to give everybody a little warning. So for anybody who isn't familiar with Hull Trinity Burial Ground, it's located in the city of Kingston upon Hull, up in the northeast of England on the coast just there. The project that we were working on was actually the A63 improvement scheme. So the A63 is the main road that comes into the city of Hull. Access to the city has been poor for a few years. And so the scheme itself aimed to improve access and egress from the city, make the road wider, make it a lot more user friendly, stop congestion, all that sort of thing. We were actually employed by National Highways and Balfour Beatty to undertake the archaeology on one of the areas that was going to be impacted by the road scheme. So for anybody who's not actually familiar with commercial archaeology, my company, Oxford Archaeology, and many other commercial units in the UK actually are developer funded. So we're not employed by universities or anything like that. We are an educational charity who are employed by developers such as National Highways, National Grid, various other sort of big infrastructure companies to investigate and deal with archaeology before developments like this road, or sometimes things like pipelines, housing estates, all that sort of thing. So we do tend to work on quite a lot of like major schemes, like just like this one. Holy Trinity Church, you can see it here. It's the largest church in Hull, now known as Hull Minster, and Holy Trinity Parish is actually the largest of the parishes in Hull. Now, the original burial ground for the Minster used to be immediately around the church, and you can see it as now it exists as this paved area. Now, by the late 18th century, this burial ground was actually full. So they decided to open a new sort of overspill cemetery, and they decided to put that on Castle Street, that's just located to the west. So you can see this is the 1791 map of Kingston upon Hull. The location of the new burial ground was decided in, I think it was 1781, and it actually opened in 1783. And you can see it here on the map. You can see it's just on the outskirts of the town. It's actually quite far away from the Minster. So the Minster is actually here. If you can see my little cursor, it's marked letter A on the map. So you can see that it's a few minutes walk from the Minster. The burial ground was actually authorised by an Act of Parliament, and as part of that, as well as the burial ground, the area it also had a jail that was built that was opened in 1785. And if we zoom in a little bit on the map, you can see here that this is the area of the cemetery, and then we've got the jail, which is up in the northeast corner of the site. And then we have this lime kiln drain that it actually gives the site its sort of slightly asymmetrical shape, because it flows towards the old route of the River Humber. And you can also see that there's a little square something just to the southeast corner of the jail area on the map. And we weren't 100% sure what this was. But having excavated there now, we're pretty sure that that building is actually a mortuary chapel that was associated with the cemetery. I should say actually, this project lasted like 10 months, and the amount of archaeology that we found there was absolutely astounding, and there's no way on this earth that I can try and even fit it all into this talk today. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be talking anymore about the jail or the mortuary chapel. I'm going to focus on the cemetery itself. I'm going to run through a little bit of information about the excavation, and then we've just managed to pull together our key findings, and we're about to submit our technical report to our client. And so I've picked out a few of the key findings from that, and I'll discuss those a little bit later in the talk. So before we actually went on site and started breaking ground, we actually started looking at the burial records from Trinity Church. And these were all scanned pages, like the ones you can see on the left of the slide. They were all scanned handwritten pages. A lot of them are available on Ancestry. They're also available at the local archives in Hull. And we actually digitized these. We entered all that information into a bespoke burial record database that was built for the project. A lot of our staff got very good at reading weird cursive handwriting. And the reason that we did this was to use this information as baseline data to look at things like the demography and structure of the population, and to give us an idea of like the sorts of people that we'd be finding, and the sort of demographic profile, like all the different, like what we're going to expect a lot of children, a lot of men and women, and all that kind of thing. And all the we recorded lots of information, like obviously the date of death if it was available, the burial date, the person's name, the person's age, any other information such as where they were from, and all that kind of thing. And as well as these records, other historical information that we recorded included census data. We were also kind of logging that in various spreadsheets, and taking details like people's names and addresses and ages and like their occupations and things. Because again, we can use all this as baseline data so that when we're looking at the skeletal record, we can compare it to the historical evidence from the time and see if it matches up or not. So here you've got a photograph of the cemetery, what it looked like before we got there. So before we broke ground, as well as doing all this digitization, we also did a survey of the gravestones that were left standing in the cemetery. So we recorded each of the stones, their location, the text or inscription that was on there, any pictorial designs that were on. And then we've also entered all of these into like a GIS map, so that we've got a full like GPS location for each one. Now, a similar survey was actually undertaken in the 1980s. And we've been able to compare our results to that, and we have found that a lot of stones have been lost between the 1980s survey and ours, but most of them are still standing in the same location. The beauty of, I guess, redoing the 1980s work is that we were able to pinpoint the locations of the stones better because there's only a hand-drawn sketch plan from the 80s survey. And so we were able to get a much better idea of like the distribution of the stones and burials. And we did actually find when comparing our data to the 80s survey that a number of stones have actually moved since the 1980s. So we wondered if maybe those have been like damaged by the weather or various other things, and then they've been reset in like a more convenient location or something like that. And here you can see on this map, so this is from our Oxford Archaeology web map. And you can see all the little squares on there that are dotted across the footprint of the site. These are all the tombs and gravestones that were recorded in our survey. So the blue rectangles that you can see on there were tombs, like table tombs that were visible on the ground surface. And the pink rectangles and lines are actually gravestones. So if it's a line that you can see, it means the gravestone is standing up. If it's a rectangle, it means that it fell down, and that's the area that it was covering that was recorded. You can also see on there that these sort of like coloured in areas are actually the ones where we excavated. You can see the area of the jail is just there on the northeast side, but these sort of yellow, green, and blue and pink areas are the bits of the cemetery that we excavated. We did actually end up referring to these as like areas A, B, and C. And then there's also a reburial trench area, which is down here, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. And the only real I did the site up like this was for logistics purposes and working out things like stuff to do with like spoil removal and all kinds of boring stuff like that that you probably don't want to know about. So here is what the excavation looked like when we started breaking ground. You can see that we're working in a tent. Now, the reason for that is because it's actually a legal requirement that when we're excavating human remains that we shield them from public view. And that's not because we don't want people to know what we're doing. It's because we are trying to work our hardest to retain the sort of dignity and respect that the deceased deserve. And we also want to make sure that there are no unsuspecting members of the public that just encounter a skeleton that they're not expecting to see, and it might have some sort of effect on them because you never know whether people are going to be very good at dealing with these things or not. So it's kind of a safety issue, really. So we started excavating the site in, let me think, it was September 2020. So right slap bang in the middle of COVID, which posed several challenges, let's say. It would have been quite a challenging site anyway and quite a challenging project. But then doing it in the middle of a global pandemic kind of like added an extra dimension to that. But I think everybody did deal with it admirably. But that's also why you'll see that in a lot of these photos, everybody's like wearing face masks and social distancing and things. So this is what the tent inside the tent looked like in September 2020, and all of those red flags that you can see on the floor are where we have started to encounter human remains. So when we started excavating on site, we had a very large field team. We had up to 90 staff on site at one point. They were all working in this tent in various teams. All the skeletons were excavated by hand, and then they were recorded digitally in a bespoke burials database. So a slightly different one to the one that the digital burial records were recorded in. This was a database that was designed for just for recording graves effectively. So we'd have the archaeologists would excavate a skeleton. We had some junior field osteologists who would do a quick in situ assessment of the skeleton, and then a decision would be made whether those skeletons will be fully analysed in our laboratory. And again, I'll come to that in a little while. So this is just a screenshot of the front page of the burials database. So you can see there's various information that we're recording. So things like the site subdivision. So that's the grid square that the skeleton was located in, the burial group number. Normally, in terms of context, we give on an archaeological site, we'd give burials like a skeleton number and a grave cut number and various other things. But because of the volume of individuals that we were going to be excavating, we actually tried to simplify this and we just gave them a burial group number that encompassed everything that we were going to find in the grave. And then obviously we had to record things like whether or not they were going to be, whether they were ready for reburial, whether they were rapid recovery skeletons, or whether we were going to fully analyze and various other things. And then you could click and enter these records and you could see all sorts of other information about that particular grave. So this is what the site looked like when we were kind of like in full swing. It very rapidly turned into looking like this. Where I did say that everybody was social distancing on this site, we were fortunate enough that we had a few couples working for us. So if you can see anybody there who is standing a little bit closer together, it's because they're a couple. And COVID, like I say, posed a lot of challenges with the whole social distancing. Our field POs actually had the task of dividing this entire site into 4 meter squares, and then assigning a staff member to each one of them, and then designing like pathways for walking around the site so that you didn't have to come into too close contact with anyone. So it sounds absolutely mad now when like I come to tell people about it, but I mean, that's just kind of like how things were. Of all the skeletons that we excavated, we actually had an agreement with the church. I should say, actually, all of these remains were obviously removed from a Church of England cemetery. It was all done under a Church of England faculty and also a Ministry of Justice license. And part of the agreement that we made with the faculty was that none of the skeletons were to be removed from the site. So they were all kept within consecrated ground at all times. And then when we'd finished analysing them, they were to be reburied individually with all of their personal belongings. And so the picture that you can see on the right of the slide there is actually our reburial trench. And so one of the first things that we did when we got to the site was that we started excavating out this kind of long, thin trench on the south side of the site. We had a team that were in there that emptied all the burials out of that area. And then once it was empty, the space was free to be able to rebury everybody from the whole of the site. And we had a very, very robust system in place whereby skeletons would be lifted, they would be analysed in whichever way it was decided, all their finds would be recorded, and that's everything from like their coffin fittings through to any personal belongings, any things like shroud pins, literally anything that was in the grave. And then they would be reunited with everything at the end, and then they were put in this reburial trench. Now, a very small number of individuals, I think it was actually about 40 skeletons, were transferred to the Minster crypt. And we did have an agreement that if we couldn't fit everybody back into the cemetery, that they would be buried in the Minster crypt instead. And so a small number did go there. And I think there's a few small items that belong to the skeletons in the crypts that are actually on display in the Minster. I haven't been and seen it myself, but I think that that is what happened. So maybe if you're popping by the Minster at any point, you'll be able to call in and have a little look and see if they're still on display. But anyway, reburial of all the individuals from the site was completed in December 2021. So a year and a little bit after we started. Yeah. And this was quite an unusual project because usually what happens with these sorts of commercial developments is that we'll undertake all the field work, we'll do the excavation, we'll lift all the skeletons out of the ground, and then they'll go and be cleaned at our office. They'll go into storage for a little while, and then once all the post-excavation program has been agreed and the budget and timings have been agreed, then we will analyze all the remains. Then they'll go back into storage for a little while, and then they'll go to a museum. But obviously that wasn't happening here because we weren't allowed to remove the skeletons from the cemetery. So all the osteological analysis that had to take place was done in a bespoke on-site laboratory. And so what you're actually looking at on this slide are the cleaning facilities for the skeletons that we're going to get fully analysed. So you can see we've got these like bays set up where one person could work safely on their own, and they would they'd go and fetch a set of remains to clean. They'd very carefully clean them by hand, and then they'd be put into trays like this. And then they'd go off to our drying facilities and then be reboxed up to be ready for osteological analysis. So this is just a little photograph of some of our on-site drying rooms. We had 4 bays like this. I know it says bay 6 on that slide, but we definitely only had 4, so I don't know what that numbering is about. But these shelving units, again, were built specially for us by Balfour Beatty. We were supplied with a low level of constant heating so that the skeletons could all be very slowly dried out after they'd been cleaned. We didn't want to heat them up too fast because that can actually damage the bones and crack them and things like that. So we want like a low level constant heat, and that's perfect for getting these remains dry. And then once they were dry, they were rebagged in clean bags. They were put in new boxes, and then they were put in storage on site again until we were ready to pick them up and take them to the laboratory. And here you can see a photograph of our online laboratory. So that's Mark at the front, Dave Henderson in the middle, and then Solange Bowling at the back. And they were 3 of our osteologists. So we had 10 osteologists on site in total. Me, myself, and Mark Gibson, who's at the front there. We were the lead osteologists. And then we had Dave, Solange, and Anne-Sophie Whitkin were senior osteologists who were working in the laboratory. And then we had a series of junior osteologists who were more responsible for working in the tent, but we did end up getting them into the lab quite a lot as well to so that they could also do some analysis. And we did actually have all 10 of us working in the lab at one point because we had such a volume of skeletons that we did actually need more people to be working on them. So this is the Oxford Archaeology Human Osteology database that we record all our human skeletal remains in, and that's true of any site that has inhumation burials on it. You can see just on the left there, this is kind of like the front page of a burial record where you can add things in like your site code and your skeleton number and the date. And then this is like a summary page that auto fills when you've filled in all these different pages that you can click on down the side. So this is like a little menu. And there'll be things pop up. So for example, if you click on dentition, then this gives you all these teeth you can click on individually to fill in information out per tooth. So if you clicked on this, it would bring up a little data entry box for the 3rd molar from the right maxilla, and you could populate that with all your information about that particular tooth and then save it, and it saves in this diagram. And we do that for every single tooth in a skeleton's mouth. Plus all sorts of things like bone inventories, things like looking at criteria to see if we can determine their age and if they're male or female, any pathology, taking lots of measurements on like long bones and things like that. So there is, you can probably imagine it takes quite a long time to record all this. So we were basically analysing like 1 to 2 skeletons per day, depending on the skeleton. So yeah, it can be quite time consuming. And here is Wayne Hoban from Reveal Imaging. So another one of the things that we were doing while we were on site is that we actually had, we were doing routine radiography of pathological skeletons just to double check things and also to help us with diagnosing various diseases. And so this is Wayne in our little radiography unit that we had set up on the side of the site, and he was x-raying a skull there to see if there was anything pathological going on. We didn't just x-ray bones. So you can see a good image there on the right where there are some bones that we've x-rayed. So what you're actually looking at is the 2 lowest neck vertebrae, so the 6th and 7th cervical vertebrae, and you can maybe be able to make out that the one on the bottom, the 7th cervical vertebrae, is actually pushed backwards, and so that is actually a neck dislocation that has then healed. So the person survived this injury. So these are the sorts of things that we were looking at. We don't get to see these very often. And especially, I think, because we were looking at an industrial population, we did see all kinds of pathologies that we don't see very often at all. But as well as the bones, we were also x-raying metal objects, particularly coffin fittings, looking for designs. And the image that you can see on the left is actually a breastplate. I think it's an iron one. I didn't look at the coffin fittings myself. That was our, we've got a coffin fitting specialist called Ashley Harrington Neal, sorry. And yeah, so this is perhaps one of the nicer x-rays that came out where you can see this lovely design with like an angel and the wings and like a, I'm not sure if that's a halo or a sun behind it. So yeah, these are the sorts of metal objects that we were looking at. We also, as well as all these many things I've already explained to you, we also had a program of isotope and DNA sampling running. The isotope sampling was done in conjunction with the University of Durham with Janet Montgomery and her team. And you can see Yulia on the left there was sampling teeth to send off to Durham for isotope analysis to look at things like migration and also diet. And then on the right, you can see Tom Booth from the Francis Crick Institute. He came up to take some DNA samples so that he is drilling into the petrous bone of a skeleton to try and get bone powder out so they can analyze the DNA. We also had a very substantial outreach program that was planned. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we weren't able to do most of it. We were going to have things like site tours so that people could come and see inside the tent if they wanted, and we could explain how everything was working. But unfortunately, that wasn't possible at all. So we did a load of online webinars and things, and we did a lot of filming. So you can see that Val there is filming our project manager, Steve Rowland, doing a little explanation of what we've been finding in the different areas of the site. And then finally, just to conclude sort of first part of the talk, we also had a special visitor. I think it was in the June of 2021. So Alice Roberts and the Digging for Britain team came to the site and we were able to do some filming with her. And then the site actually did feature on the programme. I think it is on iPlayer at the moment. I honestly can't remember what episode it was, but I'm sure you'll be able to find it. It's a couple of series ago now, so I'm sure if you do a little bit of digging, pun definitely intended, then you'll be able to find that if you want to have a look at it. So, just a little drink. So that was like the excavation in a nutshell. And now I'm going to spend the remainder of the talk mentioning the results. I'll try and whip through these because I am conscious of time. So here is the overall plan of the cemetery once we'd finished. So that's obviously the site area, and all those little sort of marks that you can see on there are all skeletons that we excavated. So the blue ones are the skeletons that we only did a rapid in situ osteological assessment on. And all the red ones are the ones that were selected for full analysis. So all in all, we were allowed to analyze a certain percentage of the assemblage in full. So that was actually 1,511 skeletons were fully analysed, and that was out of a total of 7,208 articulated skeletons, which is quite a lot. It's the biggest assemblage I've ever worked on for sure. But as well as the articulated skeletons, we were finding a lot of random loose bones in the ground. They were mainly from things like they'd been disturbed when grave diggers had like basically forgotten where a grave was, or chopped into a grave that had already got people buried in it, disturbed somebody who was already partly decomposed, and they usually just like push the bones to one side and then put the current burial in. So you can probably imagine that this cemetery, when it was like coming to the end of its use, is absolutely chock full. And we did actually find the disarticulated remains of another 1,499 people on top of the 7,208 articulated. Nearly 5 tons of disarticulated bone, because we weighed it all because we wanted to get an idea of how many people the disarticulated represented. So you can probably start to imagine that is an absolutely enormous amount of work. So what we found was that the majority of skeletons on the site were buried in pretty simple earth-cut graves. Most of them were buried in coffins. And again, they were varying quality. And to be honest, there weren't very many like things in the way of grave goods. But given that this is like a Victorian Christian cemetery, that's not super surprising. What we did find that burials were sometimes buried in their own grave, so just one per person per grave. More often, they were actually stacked on top of each other, and the most skeletons that we had in one grave was 12. Most of them were less than that. I think most graves probably only had like maybe 4 or 5 in, but we did have graves, especially ones with a lot of children in, where you would have 12 people in one plot. Um, Now, we did have evidence of shrouds being used. We had some evidence of clothing. So we had quite a lot of buttons. In some cases, it wasn't possible to work out if they were buttons from clothes or if they were from shrouds or like some sort of other funerary wear. We also found quite a few hook and eye fittings, some things that might have been from like corsets or stays or something similar. And we think looking at the distribution of the burials and the and various other bits of information that we've probably got a combination of family graves and public graves in the area. So public graves would be ones where you didn't get any choice who you were buried with. It was just kind of anybody you happened to need burying on a given day all went in the same grave that had been opened. And this was actually confirmed by the DNA analysis that Tom and the Crick undertook. And we did do DNA analysis, I should say, on 10% of the fully analysed assemblage. So that was 150 skeletons. So here are a few finds from this image. I'll just see if I can. Okay. These are just like a handful of some of the finds that we had. You can actually see there's a few more pictures of the finds on National Highways had a web page that we were updating while we were there, and I think it's still up online. So you can see we had like a find of a week thing going for a little bit with someone. So you can see here on the left, we've got, I think that's actually a pendant. I think it got a little fitting on the back of it so that it could have like a ribbon or something tied on. We found a very small number of dental implants like this one you can see here. So this is just like a little bridge that had got two porcelain incisors fixed into it. We did have a couple of other dentures as well. I think there was a gold one. Amazingly, we didn't get very many fillings. I was expecting that we might get quite a few fillings because other cemeteries of a similar date, you do tend to get quite a few. But we only had one person with a filling from this site. I think everybody else, like their teeth just had to fall out. The dental data, like their teeth are very bad from this site. We also found quite a few things like hair combs that were buried with people, like actually sometimes actually in the hair too. We had a few things like tortoiseshell hair combs, so that was quite nice. We had some other like slightly more exotic finds, you might say. So we found a conch. Now I think that they're only from like the West Indies, and we weren't entirely sure why it was there. And it also wasn't buried with somebody; it was just like kicking about in the graveyard soil. So we were a bit baffled as to why that was there, but it was very interesting. We had this is actually I think it's like a trade bead. I think that they used to be traded for slaves. Again, I think this is the only one that we had, but it wasn't something we were particularly expecting to find. And then we had this cheeky chappie who caused a bit of a stir when he was on Digging for Britain. And this is actually a novelty pipe tamper. So it's made out of lead and it is a humorous, erotic figure, I think it was described as. And it would be used for pushing tobacco down into the bowl of a pipe. There were quite a few bits of fan artwork of this guy that were put online afterwards. And then this interesting bottle as well, which you can see the in situ photo was found. This was found between the legs of an elderly female skeleton. The bottle is made out of glass. You can see that it's got the words Hull Infirmary on the sides molded into the glass. There was a cork in the top of the bottle, which had meant that the bottle was still sealed. So the liquid that was inside was the original liquid that was in the bottle when it was buried. We had a sweepstake on the site to try and guess what was in it. We sent the bottle off to the University of Nottingham for some biochemical testing, and we were all expecting it to be something pharmaceutical or maybe some alcohol or something like that. And the results of all the very extensive tests came back and showed that it was urine. Now, I did say that most of the skeletons were buried in earth-cut graves. There were a few exceptions to this. I did say that we had some above-ground table tombs. You can see an example of what the underneath of one of those might have looked like. This is actually a brick-lined shaft grave, and you can see with some stone capping. And you can see that we've got a skeleton laid on top that's not within the tomb, and then the one inside the waterlogged tomb with like some quite nice wood preservation. Actually, you can see some coffin planks and things that have still survived in there. The above ground table tombs look more like this. We had 13 of those. Quite a lot of them are gravestone inscriptions with them, and the gravestone inscriptions suggested that they contain family groups. So we tried to do some DNA on a couple of the people buried within these table tombs, and the DNA analysis did confirm that we were looking at families, and probably slightly better off families because they could afford to build a nice big monument like this. And so we've actually been able to produce a number of family trees. So you can see this is just one example here, the Walker family from tomb 1172, where we've got 3 generations from one family. We've got William Walker Sr., who we attributed to this skeleton right here. So we have been able to identify about 50 named individuals from this site as well. We did not find his wife. We're not sure if that's just that she wasn't sequenced or she maybe wasn't in that tomb. And then we got 4 of William's children that you can see here. And then we also got 2 unnamed grandchildren that were by a different sibling that we didn't manage to identify. And then obviously like a different parent. So some very interesting DNA work right there. Now, looking at some of the other osteological results, we did find that overall there were more women than men buried in the cemetery. And we found that that was actually consistent in both the skeleton data and the burial register. And we did wonder if that was partly due to the occupations of most people working in Hull at the time. So obviously we're looking at a maritime population, like it's a port town. There was a Board of Health report from 1849 that stated that of all the widows in Hull, about a third of them had husbands who died at sea. And so obviously they were never being brought back, or maybe not all the time being brought back to be reburied, like to be buried at home. They were being buried at sea instead. So that could be one thing that explains why we're seeing that there's more women in the assemblage. This is a little graph that I made to show the rough distribution of ages amongst the population. Now, this type of distribution is pretty typical for assemblages of this date. You can see that the children, so the neonates who were babies aged from birth up to about a month old, and then the infants who were babies up to about a year old, they're underrepresented a little bit. And we actually think, looking at the disarticulated bones, that this is probably because they were the ones that it was easiest for the grave diggers to disturb. So rather than us finding the whole intact skeletons, we're actually more finding those amongst the disturbed disarticulated bones. That does seem to bear out when we look at the demographics of the disarticulated bone too. We've also got slightly overrepresented preterm babies. So that's babies aged less than 37 weeks in utero. Now, usually it's very difficult to find skeletons of this age in the archaeological record, obviously because this assemblage is a little bit newer. The bone preservation was a lot better, and we did actually find quite a number of them. And one of the reasons that we think that might explain this is that perhaps the burial ground was actually, well, the people running the burial ground were actually burying preterms and like stillborns and unbaptized babies, perhaps when they weren't supposed to be. And that even includes after the cemetery had gone out of use. So there are some minutes from a council meeting from 1881 where it states that there was some council workers who were planting trees in the old cemetery in that year. And as they were taking the turf up, they found about 40 babies buried in small boxes, like literally just under the turf line. And so it was obvious that somebody had been going in and burying children way after the burial ground had gone out of use. So this is about 20 years after the cemetery stopped being used because it was full. And so it's unclear whether people were going in and doing this themselves or maybe they were paying somebody else to do it. There were adverts put in the local newspaper asking for information about the babies that were found in there, but nobody actually came forward, and none of the babies were ever identified. They were just taken away and reburied somewhere else. So that is a little sad story, but it does perhaps give us some information about why we're seeing so many of these juveniles. And these are just a few numbers here that sort of demonstrate what I was saying about it was the youngest people in society who were most prone to being disturbed by the grave diggers. So you can see here that in the assemblage where this is just the articulated skeletons. About 62% of the intact skeletons were adults and only 38% were juveniles. And then these numbers kind of bear out in the full analysis assemblage that we took into the laboratory. But then when we look at those 1,499 skeletons that have been disturbed and disarticulated, you can see that a much higher proportion of juveniles are present. So I think that this little deficit of juveniles that we've got here is probably being made up for just there. And then oh, I just forgot about that bit of the slide. So just a couple more little points to note that I thought you might be interested in before we wrap up. Another thing that we found by looking at the skeletal assemblage was that the health of children was actually quite poor in the assemblage. So we did a lot of measuring long bones, and we compared the lengths of the long bones with the ages of the skeletons, and then we compared all this data to similar modern data and then contemporary archaeological data from other places in the UK. So there's a place called Fewston that Durham University have been working on that I think is up in the northeast, and then some data that we've got from London and a couple of other places as well. And basically, in the Hull assemblage, we found that growth was stunted, like literally from birth, and it continued to remain low compared to both the modern data and children from other towns throughout their entire childhood. And we think that this is actually suggesting that the environment these children were growing up in had a very detrimental impact on their growth. And I mean, this is generally true across industrial populations at this time. But we're seeing between the Hull assemblage and also the Fewston assemblage as well, actually, that it seems to be working class populations from the north of England that are very much more affected by this, and even more so than children at the same time in the south of the country. And this might also be a reflection of things like poor nutritional status, inadequate child feeding practices, especially at a very young age. So, for example, Modern World Health Organization data recommends that mothers breastfeed their children until they're at least 6 months old. Whereas in the 18th and 19th century in the UK, breastfeeding was really, really unpopular. And this is for a variety of reasons. I mean, amongst richer women, it was considered really unfashionable and really inconvenient. You may get a wet nurse to come in and do it for you, but women weren't tending to breastfeed their own children. Whereas amongst working class mothers who had to return to work because they literally could not afford not to, they wouldn't breastfeed their children. They'd hand them off to another, like a nanny or something, or a relative, so that they could go back to work. And we have actually got documentary records showing that some mothers were returning to work as little as 3 days after giving birth. So it's not really possible for them to breastfeed. They were having to find some sort of substitute. And the typical types of substitutes that babies who weren't breastfed were given at this time are things like broths and porridges and things that are a bit more cereal based. But all of these things are quite nutritionally poor. So they tend to be made out of things like maybe cow's milk and water with like bread flour mixed in, or even like softened bread sort of like mashed up within the liquid, and then that's just given to the children. And this is really bad because not only is it nutritionally poor, but if they're using unpasteurized cow's milk, then this can predispose infants to all sorts of nasty diseases and like in gastrointestinal bleeding, bacterial infections. It can have a knock-on effect on immune system, lots of kind of gastric symptoms, all sorts of stuff. And then also, if they're being fed using a bottle, you can see on this pretty hideous diagram that I've included on this slide, it can also have an impact on oral hygiene because, yet again, milk, it's got quite a lot of sugar in it. Sometimes they might even mix sugar into the milk to try and encourage the children to drink it. And this is actually can result in something called milk bottle caries, which is where you get cavities, like very extreme cavities on the front teeth of very, very young children. And we actually found there was a really, really high prevalence of milk bottle carriers in the young children from the Hull assemblage, probably because they were being bottle fed in this way. So I shall wrap up now because I'm very aware that it's nearly 20 past 8. So there's still a lot more findings to publicise. I'm sorry that I didn't have time to talk about everything today. We are aiming to put out a monograph with online appendices. That is going to be quite technical, not as technical as our actual client report, but all the data is going to be made publicly accessible at some point. It'll probably be given to Archaeology Data Service, so everything will be made available online. But we are planning a number of popular publications that are we're just starting to schedule in writing those now. And once the road is completed, there will also be a number of information boards at the reburial site and maybe a little memorial or something like that. So anyway, thank you very much for listening to me ramble on. And yeah, just a thank you to everybody on this slide that made it all possible.
Well, thank you very much. That was wonderful. Um, I'd like to ask the first question, which was how long was the burial ground in use for?
Oh, I should have probably said that at the beginning. So it was 1783 when it opened, and then it closed in 1861. So it was a little under 80 years. So it's quite a narrow period of time. Like usually, I suppose as archaeologists, we're used to dealing with longer time spans, especially on things like cemeteries, because they can be quite hard to date. But because of all the historical evidence, we've got like a relatively narrow window that we're working in, which is really useful.
Because that's an awful lot of bodies in that period, isn't it?
It is, and actually as well. So Castle Street was the overspill cemetery for the Holy Trinity original cemetery, and then once Castle Street was full, they opened a third one somewhere else.
Oh, right. Right. Well, we've got some questions. Gilbert Mackay said, this seems to be an absolutely massive undertaking. Is this normal?
It's not normal. No. I mean, I suppose that in the last maybe 20 years, some of the larger archaeological companies in the UK have become more and more used to doing big infrastructure projects like this. So it's it's not as unusual as it used to be honest. We quite often work on things like gas pipelines, these big road schemes. Um, there was a project that I worked on for the National Grid, or just before this one actually, where it was kind of a beautification project where instead of refurbishing all the pylons down in Dorset that were due to be replaced, they were actually burying all the cables to improve the look of the landscape. Ironically, to improve the look of the landscape, they were having to dig quite a lot of it up, which meant that we then had to deal with the archaeology first. And then obviously like HS2, I mean, whatever your opinion on HS2 is, there's an awful lot of archaeology done on the route of that, which all the field work has finished now, and I think it's in negotiation for what's happening at Post-Ex. So yeah, and there were a number of large cemetery excavations as part of HS2 as well. So it is probably more common than you actually realise.
Because there were quite a lot excavated during Crossrail, weren't there?
Yeah, there was a massive amount across. So there's been a lot in London, and what makes the whole excavation a little more interesting is that a lot of the big post-medieval cemetery excavations have all been in London. There's not a huge amount of happened in the north of England. There's a decent sized one in Manchester a few years ago. There's this one in Hull. I think the Fewston excavation was a decent size. There's been a couple of sort of mid-sized ones in Sheffield. Yeah, but it is a little bit more unusual
Yes,
than
somebody's
not.
just Patricia Ferry is pointing out that Fewston's is quite local to us because it's just
Hmm.
west of Harrogate.
I think that
Right.
there's quite a lot of information available about Houston now. I think that Durham have got like I'm sure that there's like a booklet or something on it, and there's definitely some stuff on the internet. So do Google it.
Mm,
That is also a very interesting site.
yeah. Another question from Gilbert Mackay. Were the causes of death found to be related to the location of Hull, e.g., fishing, shipping?
I mean, to be honest, cause of death is not something that we're able to determine very often, because a lot of the time, whatever it is that's caused somebody to die um, is soft tissue related. And because we don't have that soft tissue left, we can't actually tell. So it's only really if somebody's had an accident where bones have been broken or affected. Or I mean, sometimes, okay, if they've got some sort of like specific infectious disease, we can say, oh, it's probably that particular, like tuberculosis or syphilis or something like that. Or if they've got like some horrible systemic infection that could be like sepsis or something, then yeah, we can say it's probably that. But unless they've got some horrible trauma that's not healed, then we can't always tell. We did have
Mm.
a few cases from this site where we could tell cause of death, but they were definitely in the minority. There was a gentleman that we managed to identify because of a number of things, where there's a man called William Watkinson, who we did manage to find some records for him. He was a boiler repairman, and he died when he was actually inspecting the underside of a large boiler that was attached to a winch, and the winch snapped and it fell on him and landed on his head. And so we found him, and he had lots of sort of cranial fractures that obviously had not healed. And that made it pretty easy to identify him. Oh, and also his gravestone was like really close to where the actual burial was. So, you know, you can kind of put two and two together. I think, oh, it must be this guy. But yeah, we didn't have a whole lot of cases where we were able to actually determine cause of death.
Quite a few people have asked, how did you decide which skeletons you were going to do rapid analysis on and which ones got the full treatment?
So my colleague Mark that you saw in one of the slides, it was his job he had the final say on it. And we had a very complicated algorithm that had been worked out by our project manager beforehand. And so I said that the site was divided into the kind of A, B, and C areas. Well, each of those areas was subdivided into other squares, and we were sampling proportionally. So we had to take a certain percentage of skeletons from each square. But
Right.
obviously, the number of skeletons that make up that percentage is determined by the number of skeletons you found. So that number basically changed every week while we were there. And it was poor Mark's job to work out how many skeletons we needed from each square every week. So there was like this really complicated system where he'd select the ones that we wanted, and then he'd have to have some on hold in case we needed to make those numbers up, or sometimes he'd have to say, oh no, we don't need that many and we'll put some back, kind of thing. And we were having to constantly check this spreadsheet to make sure that we were selecting the right numbers, but it did work. And I think you can see from the diagram, if I go back, um oops, that one. So you can see the red skeletons that the
Mm.
ones we did fully analyze, that we did actually, I think, manage to get a really, really good distribution across the site. So props to Mark for working so hard on that and managing to get it right.
Yeah, right. An anonymous person said they were wondering what was your interpretation of the urine bottle and why was it buried?
I mean, it's anyone's guess, quite honestly. Like, I'm stumped by it. We never in a million years did we expect that that's what it'd be. And I think that the biochemists at University of Nottingham were a bit disappointed by because they got really excited because they thought it was going to be some pharmaceutical compound. And they'd already been talking about like getting in touch with some colleagues that they got at the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh to like do some analysis on and figure out from whatever pharmaceutical it was, like maybe what disease it had been used to treat or something like that. And then when the test results came back, they just seemed a bit flummoxed, and then they sent us a report, and that was the last thing we heard of them.
So, I mean, you don't think it could have been a grave digger or something like that?
I mean, you can't rule it out because I don't know. I can't think of any reason why anybody would want a bottle of urine buried with them. But who knows? It's. I think it's one of these things that's going to remain a mystery.
Hmm. Dr. Gilchrist has said, thank you, Lauren. Just to mention that from some genealogical work he's been doing, I think amongst our named people, Mr. Battle, the ink maker, publisher of Hull Directory, is probably a great uncle of Gentleman Jack Ann Lister. He seems to
Oh,
be her maternal grandfather's kid brother.
Oh, I did not know that.
Hmm. Uh, was there any opposition to digging graves, e.g., from potential descendants, local residents?
I think because before the project was allowed to go ahead, and I mean that's like the road scheme as well as the archaeological work, there has to be a certain period of time where the whole thing is like advertised and made public so that there is chance for anybody who's potentially got relatives in the cemetery to come forward and lodge an objection if they want to. And I think from what I remember, there was maybe one person came forward and it went to review with the church, and I think it was deemed like it wasn't enough objection. But I mean, I should say I wasn't involved in that process.
Hmm.
That was all happened like way before we got our faculty granted and things like that. So I think there was probably a little, but it was minimal. And to be honest, I think once we started doing the public outreach and a lot of the online talks and things, I think any kind of curiosity, animosity, or whatever there might have been, I think it quickly dissipated because from the feedback that we've had, I think once people realised that we were treating these people with the utmost respect, they were being hand excavated individually, we were keeping all their things with them, we were making sure that they got like a proper reburial and things like that. I think that people just had like that reassurance that they weren't just being bulldozed out of the
Hmm.
ground and then like dumped somewhere in a mass grave. So yeah, I think in the end, I think everybody's pretty happy with it.
Good. And this person is also asking, will the database be fully open?
It should be, yeah. We're aiming to have all the data publicly accessible, and I'm not 100% sure what form that is going to take yet. But at the very least, it should all go on Archaeology Data Service. And if you've not been on that, do go and have a look because that is like an online repository for archaeological information, and it houses everything from reports through to the actual raw data that people can then download and look at themselves. So it will all be going on there. I'm not 100% on the time scale because these projects take a very, very long time to put together. And as I say, we've just finished our client report, which is like a very, very large technical document. And then we'll be sorting out the actual publications and like the more sort of public facing stuff. And then the data will all go to ADS. It'll be at the very end of the process, like at the sort of archival end of things. So it still might be a few years yet because these things do take a little while because they're quite complex. But it
Right.
will be there. It will be there at some point.
Right. And one last question. Janet Waite asks, was the jail in use after the cemetery was used? And did any of the jail inmates end up there, e.g., hangings?
Um, I mean, quite honestly, I'm not the best person to ask about the jail because I didn't work on it at all. I was more concerned with all the cemetery stuff. As far as I know, we didn't have anybody from the jail in the cemetery. I don't think that any of the burial records have indicated that. Um, but I mean, if it wasn't mentioned on the burial records, then we might not have picked it up. So I can't say with 100% certainty, but I don't think so.
Right. Well, that was wonderful. I'll hand you over to Bill to
Shall I stop
say how
sharing a bit?
grateful we are.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, that was brilliant, and I think it was confirmed by the number of questions that we had. I'm certain we could have had another 10 or 15 minutes with questions. Super subject, super project. Imagery was really, really crisp and good and so easy to see. So thank you. Absolute delight and a pleasure to have you talking to us. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. Okay, well, I hope you all enjoyed it. And as always, let's have your feedback. It really is important for us to have that. We've still got a few copies of our history book, still trying to sell it to make a little bit of money. And if you want to have one, just give us a ring on 01845 527 717 and we'll be gladly and gratefully pleased to receive your money and send you a book. Again, if you would like to make a donation, because we do pay our speakers, we like to get high quality speakers, we'd appreciate any kind of donation that you can make, and that would be to Thorntonley Street History Group, and our bank account is a sort code of 206146. That's 206146. And the account number is 0342 9881. That's 0342 9881. We've had quite a few donations, and we're very, very grateful for those. They do help us to move on and get more webinars into the system. Okay, so that's the end of our webinars for the time being, and we will start again in the autumn after we've had a meeting and decided who we're going to try and get to engage. So your feedback would be again useful. If there's any particular topics that you'd like to hear about, we'll do the best to see what we can do. So next webinar probably will be in the autumn. I mean, the nights are getting lighter, the weather's improving, so it's time that we should all be out and about and seeing things in the physical state. Right, well, thank you again to all our viewers and also to our international viewers as well. We're very pleased that you do enjoy and engage with our programme. So until the autumn, please keep safe and well, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. Good night.